Good morning and welcome to the Bupa UK webinar, Building a Dementia-Friendly Society. And first of all, thank you all for taking the time to join us this morning. First of all, my name is Dan and I'll be moderating today's chat. But to give you a bit of insight before we go on, just two seconds on dementia itself. So as the population ages, the number of people living with dementia is set to increase. Therefore, it's never been more important to make the UK a dementia-friendly society. And the question we're seeking to answer today is exactly how is it that we do this? Before we begin, I'd like to introduce you to two very special speakers. Firstly, Professor Graham Stokes, Bupa's Global Director of Dementia Care. He comes to us with over 20 years worth of experience and a breadth of knowledge on everything from choosing a care home to offering advice to those living with the condition. Secondly, I'd also like to introduce Professor June Andrews. Professor Andrews is currently Director of the University of Stirling's Dementia Services Development Centre and has carried out extensive research on how life can be improved for those living with dementia over the years. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please do send them to the Q&A chat bar on the right-hand side. We will do our best to answer these at the end of the discussion, and if we don't have time or can't answer them, we will follow up in the documentation afterwards. So without further ado, let's begin our discussion. Firstly, before Professor Stokes takes us into a really interesting insight and presentation about the City of York, I'd like to ask both of our speakers, what does a dementia-friendly society inclusive society look like to you? And maybe we can start with you, Professor Andrews.
Thanks very much. One of the things that I find slightly difficult about the idea of a dementia-friendly society is that society is a very large concept. And there are lots of people in society, and the number of people who are affected by dementia are very small. Sometimes it feels as if dementia is my whole life, but the number of people affected is small. And so the idea of a society where people who are in a real minority are looked after properly is quite a difficult one to talk about. Now, we know that our Prime Minister has made a commitment to his Prime Minister's challenge has made a commitment to dementia-friendly communities. And some of the ideas that have come up there are interesting. People should be more aware of dementia. Businesses that people with dementia might use should be businesses which are sensitive to their needs and look after them and the needs and challenges that their carers are presented with. So the idea of a dementia-friendly and dementia-aware community is really quite a strong one. But we've been working on a survey which is called the Big Ask, and in our survey we've been asking people what they thought would be more useful. And it's quite interesting that there's now starting to be an emerging idea where the dementia friendliness of society as a whole is something that people are interested in and they want, it's a given. But what they're really worried about is the level of knowledge in health and social care staff, because particularly the women who answered our queries, our survey, particularly the women felt that sometimes they were disappointed by the level of knowledge in the people that they meet. So clearly a dementia-friendly society is one where people are aware of it and they help their neighbours, but it also needs to be one where the people who set themselves up to look after people with dementia really know what they're doing and give confidence to the people who have to receive those services. So that's something that I think about, particularly in the light of what the survey results said about dementia-friendly society.
Great. And was there anything that you'd add to that at all, Professor Stokes?
Yeah, I think a few things. I mean, I agree with everything that June has said. I think the first thing is that when I hear the term dementia-friendly, and the need for education, training to deliver that, I don't think anybody needs to be trained to be friendly. That's part of the human condition. So I'm far more in favour of using the term dementia inclusive rather than dementia friendly for that very reason. So that's one thing. The second thing is that it's possible that we need to wait for the arrival of the next generation of young people and children to be adults who are participating fully in the community, because if you can get to work in schools, and we do a lot of work with our dementia champions going into schools, Young children have got no prejudices, they don't hold a stigma against anybody who has dementia, their hearts and minds are quite open. And I think what we can see then is that those children who become adults may well then truly be more accepting of people who are living with dementia. I think today there are still far, far too many people in the community who have got very fixed attitudes and still a lot of ignorance about what dementia is. So I think we do need to concentrate a lot on younger people, in particular activity in schools. And I think the third thing is that we've got the language. We talk about dementia-friendly, dementia inclusivity, we talk about personalised services, meeting the needs of people with dementia, everything seems to be person-centred. Yet when we've looked at the outcomes of England's National Dementia Strategy, that was a 5-year strategy from 2009 to 2014, when we've surveyed the consequences of that strategy, there's a lot of satisfaction when it comes to increased awareness, more information available, greater availability of training programs. So that's good. But the closer you got to true action that made the lives of people with dementia better and their caring families, so we now start talking about services, the balance flipped into dissatisfaction. So we can't have a state of affairs where we say we're friendly, we're inclusive, in other words, the language is right, if we're not actually doing something that makes the lives of people truly different. So I think those are the add-ons I wanted to place before you.
Great, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And something that you'll be taking us through in a second, Professor Stokes, is this about the city of York and how it's become a shining example in the UK of a dementia-friendly city. So I think the video is about to start playing now, and maybe you can take us through your view on that and the overview that you've provided.
Dementia Action Alliance was formed with the help of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's Dementia Without Walls project to make York a good place for people with dementia and to visit as well. It was launched in 2013. The Alliance now has over 45 formal members, including individual people, organisations, businesses, shops, cafes and community groups, all working to raise awareness and reduce the stigma of dementia. Alliance members must attend dementia training education sessions and complete an action plan saying how they will help those living with dementia. Participating shops and businesses are identified by a special forget-me-not blue flower sticker. In addition, the JRF supported the Dementia Without Walls project by providing small grants to local groups in York and bringing together people from museums and art galleries to work on local initiatives. To find out more about the project, we spoke with Philly Hare from Dementia Without Walls. She told us that they've learned a lot about what's important in creating dementia-friendly communities, including how to make them accessible, inclusive, welcoming, and supportive. Organisations such as the Songbox Music Group have built strong, supportive relationships with those living with dementia. As you can see from the feedback they've had, they help people with dementia live better lives through singing groups. And it's not just those living in York the Alliance wants to help. Visit York ensures staff at their information centre are ready to help all visitors, including those living with dementia, offering a welcoming, calming environment. Another innovative way of raising awareness, the Real People Theatre Company teamed up with local activists Sue Lister to put together a special play entitled Dementia and Me. This interactive play encourages audience participation and tells the story of a mother diagnosed with dementia and her daughter as her carer. It aims to encourage discussion and the sharing of positive ways of coping. So what can the rest of the UK learn from York? The Alliance members told us that while there is no template, it's important to continue to raise awareness, encourage discussion and community engagement so all can be responsive to the needs of those living with dementia. So to conclude, a big thank you to all those who contributed their thoughts, stories and experiences of York.
That's some really interesting stuff inside there, and there's a few questions I'd like to follow up on that to both of you with. And I think the first one is there's loads of different things that were going on, but why is that important for those living with dementia at the moment? And maybe you want to start, Professor Andrews.
So it's important for people with dementia to be given all the support they can, because dementia is a really it's a really difficult condition. People die of dementia if they don't die of something else in the meantime. So dementia is very hard, and people are very fearful of dementia. So anything that can be done in the community to make their lives easier, to make the lives of their families easier, has to be welcomed. So the things that have been mentioned there, like theatre groups that will help with communication, shops and services that have had special training in order to be able to understand a person with dementia and their challenges, in order not to stigmatise them, in order to look after them. These things are very important. Other things I think that are quite crucial that haven't been mentioned are things which, for example, we see in Northern Ireland. Now, Northern Ireland is better than the rest of the UK in terms of the number of people who've been given their diagnosis. I was working in a health area in London this time last year. Well, in fact, it was December last year, where the diagnosis rate was 20%. And in the discussions that I had with particular one GP, she said that one of the problems was they weren't really sure how to go about it and what to do. And in that particular health board area, or that health authority area, the people on the board of the health authority all had their Dementia Friends badges. So they all had their attitudes and their hearts in the right place. But the issue was that only 20% of the people who had dementia in that local area, either they or their family, knew that that was the problem. So having all the things, I'm actually echoing what Graham said earlier, having all the dementia acceptance there is an essential part of the mix. But the diagnosis and the knowledge of the health and social care staff is crucial, because of one last thing that I want to mention, which is this. In terms of the numbers of people with dementia, these are the good old days when there aren't very many, because the population hasn't aged yet the way it's going to. And in terms of the amount of money that's available for dementia, these also are the good old days, because I can't see any sign of the availability of increased tax money in proportion to the number of people who have dementia. So what we have to think about for our families is to be thinking about what arrangements they're going to make for the future for their dementia care. So there are things that you can do in order to keep yourself well to try and delay symptoms, but the financing of it in the future is something that any dementia aware or dementia prepared society has to think about. Now, I'm making preparation for myself, and I've got my fingers crossed that I won't be one of the people affected, and then I can spend that money on champagne and shoes and all the things I like. But I think people really need to be aware of the fact that we are, as communities, going to have to look after our own as families. And that's a big problem that we don't hear people talking about as much as the dementia awareness things, exactly as Graham has been saying.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, and that leads me quite nicely on to my next question, really, which is, talks a lot about the future and making things inclusive, but what would you say, Professor Stokes, are the correct processes or things that need to be thought about kind of up front in a kind of wider level?
I think June used an excellent phrase that I've not heard before, which is dementia prepared. June is quite right. We're on the cusp of an explosion in the numbers of people with dementia, probably less than 10 years away before we start to see a real acceleration in those numbers. And I used to think, and I'm only going back probably 3-4 years, that this whole concept of dementia-friendly societies, which, as I say, I tend to favour dementia-inclusive societies now, was on the margins. The real thing to do was to keep banging on the door of government, demanding more monies for health and social care, until, as June quite rightly said, the money's not there. The money's not there now to provide levels of services that we wish to see, and most definitely will not be able to keep a pace with the growth in the numbers of people that are going to, in the UK, double over the next 35 years. So for me, the whole movement to get the community engaged, so people are supported by their own families, and in turn those families are supported by the community, is for me up front and central. The way I see it panning out is that government, directly through the healthcare agencies, healthcare authorities, the NHS in the UK, they will have to take responsibility for uplifting diagnosis rates. In the UK, we've done very well over the past 5 years. We've uplifted diagnosis rates as an average tremendously well. As June rightly says, though, still great levels of poor levels of performance, where it's a patchy picture. It is classic postcode healthcare. Live in certain areas of the UK, you'll get a diagnosis efficiently and effectively within a relatively short period, having been referred by your GP. In other areas of the country, there's a long time lag following a GP referral, and in other areas of the country, we see GPs not actually referring for specialist diagnosis. So I think there still needs to be great investment by government in the NHS in the UK to uplift those diagnosis rates. And then what we have to appreciate is that after a diagnosis, something has to happen. There is no merit in having a diagnosis if it doesn't lead on to anything. And when there is no sign of an elegant medical breakthrough to treat dementia. So this isn't about pharmacology. Something has to happen, and that is the monitoring, the managing of people's care to prevent crisis, enabling people with dementia to live well, to enable their caring families to feel they're supported. And government hasn't got the money to do that. We understand that is the case, because what we hear is now that if your needs are not critical, then the NHS and the social services won't be there for you until they become critical. And what does that mean? That means when all is failing, families are exhausted, the person with dementia is vulnerable and distressed, then we start to see health and social services stepping in. And that is another rightful place for the government to be. Either directly or indirectly, they must be supporting the NHS, the social services, independent care providers to provide quality of care as people get to the end of the journey. But the period between the diagnosis and the end of the journey is measured in years. And what we now have to see is society stepping forward to support people who are living with dementia and support their caring families. And that support isn't cheap. I mean, it's cheaper, because we're not saying that there must be more social workers, for example, more community nurses, so it's cheaper, but it's not cheap. And I'm quite comfortable with society stepping forward, so long as that society is supported, because I and many others like me see dementia as an intellectual disability. It's an intellectual disability caused by untreatable brain diseases. So if you see it as a disability, it's on a par with all other disabilities. And if you ask somebody who's living with a visual disability or a physical disability, what do you need to make your everyday life better? They don't say, I want more doctors and nurses and social workers. What they say is, I want to be valued, supported, integrated, included, respected, and that enables me to live well. And that's all the language we want to bring into the care of people living with dementia and the community to deliver on that. So that's how I see the coming years. What we have to do is to ensure that happens, and then not, as June has said, it's just a lot of fine words.
Great. And so far we've talked a lot about society as a whole and the wider picture, and that brings us quite nicely onto the next part of our topic, is to narrow it down and actually looking at the dementia inclusive or friendly workplace. And I think maybe this is a good time to actually ask you both, and maybe June, you wouldn't mind starting, was to you, what is working age dementia? Obviously the overarching, and then what difference that means to the dementia as a whole society.
Right. Well, working age dementia is precisely what it says. Normally people think of dementia as a condition that affects older people, and of course that's true, because the majority of people with dementia are old or even very old. By the time I'm 90 years old, I will have about a 50% chance of having dementia. What's defined as working age really changes. I'm one of the women whose pension age has gone from 60 to 67 in the time that I've been at work. But working age dementia in general is regarded as dementia of people who would still be in a position to be holding down a job, perhaps have dependent children, people who have particular responsibilities and relationships which are not the same as those. And of course that's made complicated by the fact that insofar as there are services for people with dementia, those services are focused on the kind of people who most often use them. So if you think of care home care, for example, the majority of residents in care homes with dementia are probably women over the age of 80 who are in the last couple of years of their lives. A person with working age dementia, the percentage of those people who are male is probably higher. The working age dementia can be caused by Alzheimer's disease, the inherited forms of Alzheimer's disease. It can also be caused by alcohol-related brain damage, things like that. So this is a different kind of person, and just to be stereotypical, a man with that kind of problem, with a wife and kids, has different needs from a grandmother who's frail and towards the end of her life. And any services that are provided, which would be communal services where you bring a lot of people together for economy of scale, those kind of services are going to be few and far between unless you're living in a big conurbation. So working age dementia is effectively the cluster of symptoms caused by a variety of diseases in people younger than we would normally expect, with the additional problem of the complex social picture that's presented and the fact that it's really hard to get services organised in a way that will help them. And there's also the issue of poverty, because if I'm, as I am just now, I'm at work, my family's dependent on my income. If I started to have the intellectual disability that Graham has described, and I stop being able to do my job as well, then perhaps I'll get demoted, perhaps even sacked, long before anybody works out that what I have is a health-related problem. And so if they sacked me because I had a visual impairment, that would absolutely be against the law. But if I just was not able to perform, if it was a performance issue, then I might be well out of the protection of the workplace before anything was sorted out. So working age dementia is a complex and unique problem. But again, as we say, far fewer people affected, which doesn't make it a smaller problem. It means that for those individuals, it's an even bigger problem.
And in your capacity, Graham, does that, or would there be anything you'd add to that, or any different trials or tribulations that you'd add to that to think about working age dementia?
June said right at the beginning of the webinar about sort of living and breathing dementia, as if it's all around us, because this is the area we're specialists in, wherein obviously it's the minority of people who have dementia. For me, living and breathing it, one of the wonders of working in this area is that the agenda keeps evolving. And 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been talking about the workplace. Now, for me, it's one of the major concerns and considerations I have. It's probably addressing a number of issues. For example, many people, especially people who work in major towns and cities, working in large companies, they probably have more contact with colleagues than they do with the neighbours they live in the streets. And so it can be a great opportunity to support people who are, for example, having care and responsibilities for people who are living with dementia. And so supporting family carers, I think, is critical in the workplace. And from my perspective, working for Bupa, we're a large care home provider, and common to all care home providers, approximately 85% of the caring workforce are women. And the average age of a care home worker, whether it be a social carer or a nurse, is a woman in her mid-late 40s. Now what that means is that logically their parents are going to be in their mid-late 70s and early 80s. So it doesn't take a genius to work out that given informal family carers are predominantly women, a significant number of female care workers and nurses are going home at the end of the day and picking up care and responsibilities for their aged parents, many of whom will be living with dementia, which means those nurses and carers are both working in the system and also supporting the system. And it's a question of how well we enable those workers to be effective people at work, but also to be effective carers without them becoming stressed, burnt out and exhausted. So I think we need to do something for those people who are family carers, predominantly women. But as June has already said, in her working career, her retirement age has gone from 60 to 67. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing an aging of the workforce. There are more people now working between the ages of 55 and 64 than ever before. And we're in the earliest of days, the green shoots of seeing an uplift in the numbers of people who are working between 65 to 74. And in part, this is to do with the changing of eligibility for state pensions. So as we go through into 2020, 2030 and onwards, we're going to see an increasingly aged workforce where it will not be unusual for people working close to or even beyond their 70th birthday. Now, as soon as that happens, we see a transformation in the numbers of people who are likely to be working and living with dementia. Junie's quite right. To date, middle-aged people with dementia, probably somewhere around 40,000 people, they tend to have a host of conditions that cause dementia that aren't typical. So, as June said, it could be alcohol-related dementia, it could be frontal dementia, not as we find with elders, Alzheimer's disease being the main cause. But as we start to see an aging workforce, we have workers who are around the 70th birthday, Alzheimer's disease will be one of the causes of the dementia that we see. And so it's a question then of how do we support people who in their early stages of dementia wish to carry on working. And it is an important consideration. I mean, incredibly crudely, but what we say is that people in their 60s, we're looking at an odds of getting dementia about 1 in 100. As you start approaching and going past the 70th birthday, the odds start to tumble to 1 in 20. So you can see that there'll be an increasing number of people who will be living with the early stage dementia who may well wish to carry on working. And then if you see dementia as a disability, you just don't turn that person away. It would not only be scandalous, it would be illegal to say if somebody has a physical disability, we will now block your employment opportunities. We will have to support and enable that person to carry on working. And that will have to be the consideration that we have for people who are living with dementia. And then what we can't be is just trite in our thinking. Again, to get the language right, we're a supportive employer. What does it actually mean to support people to work in their early stages of dementia? And at one level, what it can involve, it would be to have an uncluttered workstation, for example, have a pace of performance that is adjusted to the needs of people living with dementia. That's fine, but what about if you're a bus driver or a surgeon or a frontline nurse? What then does it mean to say that we are a supportive employer? And I've started to have conversations with people who are of working age or have just gone past working age and say, what would have helped you? What does help you? And I should say at this point, it does tend to be what would have helped you, because many people with dementia aren't continuing with their employment. And one gentleman said to me, I've got so much accumulated knowledge, so much experience. Okay, take me out of the front line, take me away from the sharp end, but I can mentor people, I can coach people, I can be the wise one in the background. So those are the early conversations that might start to indicate how we might support somebody to carry on working who is in the early stages of dementia.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And at this point, I would like to introduce everyone on the phone to Keith Oliver. So Keith Oliver worked as a successful and well-respected head teacher and was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 55. In the upcoming video clip we're about to show, he describes his early symptoms and how that affected him in the workplace. And here's his story.
My name is Keith Oliver. I'm 56 years of age. I was a head teacher of a large primary school in Canterbury, where I'd been head for 11 years, and this was part of a career which had spanned 35 years in education as a teacher and as a local education authority advisor. About 2.5 years ago, I experienced a series of unexplained falls. I'm feeling wobbly, as if I was walking on a boat all the time, and felt much greater fatigue, and generally speaking, had a feeling of being unwell. We thought perhaps it was an ear infection. So I went to the GP, who examined my ears and said there was no sign of an infection, but gave me antibiotics just in case. I took the course of antibiotics and there was no difference, no improvement. So we went back to the doctor, who did some further investigation with my balance and asked me some various questions about my health generally and sent me for an MRI scan. An appointment was then rushed through to see a neurologist to get the results of the scan. I didn't suspect anything, didn't think anything more of it, and he, rather out of the blue, said to my wife and myself that he suspected that the scan suggested that it could be early signs of dementia, which had not previously been mentioned by the GP or by anyone else and wasn't really on our radar, so it was a shock. We came away from that appointment with the neurologist shaken but determined to see things through, and clung in a sense to the point that at this stage it was only suspected. It was nothing was confirmed. It was a suggestion that it could be dementia. Amongst the early symptoms which I experienced were difficulties at work with regards to meeting deadlines, which previously hadn't been a problem. As a head teacher, I'd always operated with an open door policy and had been very easy with multitasking and so on and so forth. That became a severe problem. I was finding that I could only concentrate on one thing at one time. Answering the phone became a challenge. Retrieving information was becoming difficult, and retaining information. Not memory as such, that came a little bit later. It was more taking information in and then bringing it to my fingertips later. Things were becoming more difficult, generally speaking, and I had to confide also in colleagues, close colleagues at school, because I was determined I wanted to carry on working for as long as I possibly could. So the deputy was brought into my confidence, the secretary was brought into my confidence, but no one else, because at this stage it was still very early in the investigation as well, and nothing was confirmed. I managed to carry on working until the end of the summer term, which I was pleased about. Rosemary used to come up, my wife used to come and collect me from work some lunch times, and we'd go off-site and have something to eat, and I'd have a snooze in the car and then go back to work in the afternoon. So all these things were happening, and staff were getting concerned. There was a clear raising of anxiety in the school around my health, but no one knew what the situation was, apart from the 2 or 3 people who I'd confided in. We then had the summer holiday, and during that time I reflected upon my position and realised that it was untenable. And at the start of the September term, I went in for 2 days because I was determined to start the new year off with staff and children and to open the school up. And then seeing the GP, he signed me off for 2 months, which in turn became 6 months, at the end of which a diagnosis was confirmed, and on April the 1st my career of 35 years in teaching came to a close.
I'm sure you'll agree that was a really interesting video. As a board member of the Dementia Action Alliance, Keith is committed to staying positive and raising public awareness. His belief is that the reason his health has stayed so good since the diagnosis is due to his determination to live positively and to the full and remain as well as possible. So based on this and what you were saying previously, what else is there that employers can do? As Keith says, everyone is different as are their circumstances, so it's important to do what works best for them and their carer or partner, and find someone to work in the workplace to talk to. But what are the kind of educational processes that could possibly be put in place there? And maybe June, you can start on that one.
Yes, they're obviously if you have an employer which has already gone through kind of Dementia Friends program, you know that people in the workplace will have some level of dementia awareness. The difficult thing for an employer is the extent to which you are obliged to keep confidential any health issues that the person with dementia has. And as has already been said by Graham, we're living through a time at the moment where we hope our children and grandchildren won't have these attitudes, but certainly in the employment situation at the moment, there are people who still would have prejudice about a person with what's seen as a mental health issue. There's also the problem at the moment of employers requiring more and more of fewer and fewer people, and so the idea that someone perhaps has is less able to perform unless dementia itself is classified as a disability, when they're seen as a legal duty to be able to, a legal duty and requirement to support the person to perform their work, and assistance for employers in being able to do that, then the situation is quite tricky. But Graham hinted at it before when he spoke about things like an uncluttered work zone. There are changes that could be made. It was interesting that in the film, it was clear that here was a man who could still do his job if certain things happened, if people didn't interrupt him, if he had the chance to have a snooze in the middle of the day. You know, the idea, goodness, I think I should start having a snooze in the middle of the day. I think that there are things that come with dementia. What dementia dementia is caused by an illness, but there are also other issues about the ageing workforce where employers could, through assistive technology, help. There are situations where perhaps the person may not be required to travel to work. That might reduce the requirement, the fatiguing requirement to fight your way through traffic to get to your workplace. And there may be assistive technology that can be used at work that will make life easier. If someone is having difficulty with recall, there may be assistive technology that can be used. And of course, the thing about that is the sooner we all start using that assistive technology, the better. One of the learning experiences I had was actually with a child with dementia who came to visit us here at the Dementia Centre. We don't usually call the disintegrative disorders of childhood dementia, but that's what effectively they are. It's an irreversible cognitive reduction in capacity caused by an underlying illness. But this wee guy who was about, I think he was about 11 at the time, he was so savvy with his technology. He had his mobile phone in his hand, and he taught us things that you could do with a mobile phone that would really help when your cognitive capacity was being reduced. Now, it may be that generations are coming forward who are already using those sorts of things. People complain about the fact that nobody knows anything anymore because they can always look it up. Well, maybe the time is coming when someone having dementia and having that kind of problem, they're already going to be familiar with the technology that can help support them. So there are certainly things that employers are going to have to be able to do. But we have to be realistic, and it's against the background of a much more punishing workplace for very many people at work. So, yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, and I think the influence of technology is an interesting place as well as the reducing the demands and needs. But maybe, Graham, maybe in your setting there was there anything you'd add or any differences to what June's saying there?
No, there's no differences at all. I think these are the earliest of days when it comes to saying how do we enable people to carry on working for as long as they both wish to and are able to. I mean, it was impressive with Keith that it was quite clear there was nobody guiding and advising him. He was finding his own way, and in essence his job stayed the same. He realised what would make life easier for him, as June said, having a snooze in the middle of the day, not being interrupted. I dare say he was trying to unclutter his work life as much as possible, and he very quickly realised he had to bring in 2 people to assist him, and that was his deputy and his secretary. So he was finding his own way, and that enabled him to get the last few months of work life that he wished. So I think the first thing to say is that somebody caught up in this. I mean, nobody expects to get a diagnosis of dementia. There would be a need for some advice, guidance, and support. And if we take that into the workplace, then what that person has to know, even before they have the conversation, is that when they do have the conversation, they're not going to confront stigma and prejudice and fear and expectation that they're a danger to themselves and others. And so I think having a dementia literate, a dementia informed workplace is critical to this, and it's something I've been doing in Bupa for the last 9 months. In the UK and in other countries as well, like Japan, we have the Dementia Friends movement. We have around 1 million dementia friends in the country. And what I've done is to create what we call Dementia Buddies, which is an e-learning platform for Bupa's 80,000 employees. And what this does, it enables people to go online and over 20-25 minutes build up their knowledge of what dementia is, what it's like to be a person living with dementia, what that experience feels like. And that starts to bring about a dementia-informed and a dementia-sensitive, and I like what June said, a dementia-prepared workforce. So you set the culture. So a person who is in that culture, who then tragically becomes a person who's living with dementia, knows that they're not going to confront stigma and prejudice when they disclose they have a diagnosis of dementia. So that's one thing. The next is, what do you then physically, tangibly do to enable that person to carry on working? And we've touched on uncluttering the environment. Keith himself said reduce interference. Quite clearly he was sending out the message, give me breaks and time away from the workstation, the workplace. I mentioned that you can actually support people through tolerance and understanding, but we do need possibly to soften the boundaries between work and home life. June said, well, do you have to travel into work? Well, with modern day technology, that's less and less necessary. Can we be flexible with people's work times? You may be delayed in the morning because you're forgetting, you're concentrating poorly, or it's just one of those bad days. So you're not having somebody who's going to be exceedingly watchful because you're coming through the door of the building 30 minutes, 60 minutes later than usual, and similarly at the end of the day, do you need to go home earlier? I think that we've got a long, long way to go before we can say we have a workplace that's prepared to accommodate the needs of people with dementia, but we start now. We've already said that the dramatic increase in numbers is in front of us. That applies to people with working age as well. There's no point waiting until we're actually in the midst of the challenge and say, what are we going to do? Now is the time to do it, so we're more prepared as we go to 2020, 2025 and beyond.
So a lot of what you were both talking about is about education and being prepared as well. And one of the things to contend with in where we are today in 2015 is technology. And June, you began to touch on it there. But maybe you can start by talking a little bit more about how technology can help people living with dementia and their family carers in the world of health apps and brain health and exercising and that kind of stuff.
Great. Well, in a way, it's a shame I'm talking about this now, because in a couple of weeks' time we're having a conference and exhibition in Birmingham at the Vox Centre, where technology is going to be a huge part of what we do. We've got an exhibition there with about 250 exhibitors, and we've had a competition for technology startups to get bright young people who've got new ideas. I shouldn't say bright young people, I mean bright new people in the thing. They're young companies, but sometimes the people operating them aren't themselves young in years. But we've got this exhibition with a competition where people are going to be looking at what the best ideas are that will make a difference. And when in the past I've been asked to talk to Technology Strategy Board or other people about what would make a difference, the most important thing was for me to describe what the problems are for a person with dementia, as they tell me what their problems are, and for those companies to think up things that would help with that particular problem. I sometimes find it starts in the opposite direction. You know, someone invents something and then they try and get us to say how that thing that they've invented would help a person with dementia. So if you look at what the significant issues are for people with dementia, you can see what the technology things are. So many people assume that they know what the problem is for a person with dementia. We did some research with the University of Leeds, and people always think of dementia as a memory problem, but when you actually do the research with both the carers and the people with dementia, the memory problem isn't the biggest one that they always mention. The sorts of things that are problematic for them are agitation, anxiety, sleeplessness at night and nocturnal wandering. And I use the word wandering advisedly. It's not a very acceptable word, but it's what the carer thinks of it as when the person walks somewhere where it's not helpful or it's inappropriate or they might walk into danger. And so when you look at the assistive technology that helps with the things that people actually complain about that people actually find hard to live with when they've got when they're affected by dementia, then the assistive technology that's available is very interesting and very wide. And I would highly recommend to people listening a website called AT Dementia, which is run by a charity. And AT Dementia is almost like a brochure website that tells you what sorts of technology is available to buy and how much it costs. And they divide it into technology which helps with safety. So that would include all the things that most of us should have in our house, like carbon monoxide or fire or heat detectors. And those technology things are writ large. The need for them is writ large for people with dementia because they may be slower in thinking about things, their judgment might be impaired. And so some of the things that we have seen in terms of that would include issues about heating and lighting for people with dementia. An app, for example, that will allow someone who's not living in the house with the person with dementia to monitor what the temperature is, so that if in winter, because of their fear of fuel poverty, if in winter they're not warming the house up enough, that person can actually control the heating in the house and can switch the heating on even if the person decides not to do it. So that's a kind of domestic environment one. When we think of the devices that people use in order to help with becoming lost, which is one of the biggest fears we found from the research, then the assistive technology to help with that is amazing now. It's unobtrusive, it's body worn, it can be detected by your family. And I'm looking forward to the day when they just chip me like they've chipped my Westie. You know, I think it'll eventually become very, very small, but there are big ethical issues involved in that. So the range of assistive technology that is available is vast, and we should all find out as much about it as possible, because what you quite often find, as with the technology for locator devices or even keeping the temperature right in people's homes, the more technology people have, then the longer they're able to stay in their own homes. And bearing in mind the cost issues that we've been talking about and the population issues, it is going to be the case that we have to support people to stay in home for longer. So the assistive technology has a vast role. And just one last word of warning, which is the number of inventors who come to me to say, I've invented a thing that does X, when there's already something on the market that does that. There are a lot of people who are not aware of what already exists, even the people who think they might have a market for it. So there's assistive technology has a huge role, but we have to make sure the ethics around it are attended to. And you know, like hearing aids, there's no point in having one if nobody knows how to change the battery.
True, yeah, lots of technology to contend with, and I'd like at this point maybe to pass over to Graham because and ask you the same question, but also around if you see any limitations to technology in the world we live in at the moment.
I think, especially when you come to technology, you really are in the space of you don't know what you don't know. Nobody 10, 15, 20 years ago would have had a concept that said we need Google or we need Facebook. We just didn't know what we didn't know. And so in 2030, I think we'd be in the same position, or maybe even in 2020, because the technology moves so fast. So when June said bright minds, and I think she said bright young minds, although today most people are just young when it comes to me, we need bright minds, probably from outside of the area. People are coming in from areas such as social media, people who are doing things out there that we're in health and social care we don't even know about, bringing them in and saying, look, these are the challenges and issues. One challenge is technology and dementia care. No, technology and dementia care at what point in someone's journey? I think at the beginning, someone like Keith can relate well to technology, could probably benefit from some digital exposure, using apps to guide and inform. Yet as you progress, and by definition, dementia destroys the capacity to think, reason, remember, communicate. Technology becomes more and more challenging for you. And so you can argue is the more your dementia progresses, if you have to engage with that technology, it's probably going to be redundant. So then you can start saying, well, we need technology now to enable those who are caring to feel that they are a more effective carer, giving them peace of mind. So it's whatever you're now coming up with as a technological solution, at what point of the journey is it applicable, and who is going to benefit most at that particular point in the journey. So for me, technology and dementia care, but be more specific. I think what I would never wish to see or hear is that we're using technology to replace human relationships. Technology is going to be a means to improve the lives of people who are affected by dementia. Human relationships enable people to live better with dementia. It's just another tool. It's not replacing. And so I think that's something that does concern me, that you are seeing some people believing that the more you can put in, for example, monitoring technology, the less you need to have human contact with the person living with dementia. And obviously I don't think that's a path we'd ever wish to tread. So I think there's great opportunities. I think a lot of it is you don't know what you don't know. And I think there's a lot there that we still need to say, does technology truly help? We need to know the outcomes, not just the bright ideas that appear to sound good. So some of the work that I'm engaged with at the moment are avatars. I mean, avatars are just ways of communicating visually information. And I can see a real role for them, because avatars meet the need to have information now. If you're a distressed or stressed carer, and you mentioned somebody walking around the house at 1 o'clock in the morning, upsetting, distressing, causing anxieties, you don't want to wait until 8:30 in the morning to telephone the GP to get an appointment, hopefully that day or maybe the day after, to talk it through in terms of what should I do, how should I be feeling, is it bad for me to be angry? If you can just switch on your television, connect to an avatar, which is basically just a piece of software that's going to be scanning answers to the questions you're putting, and many of them now are responsive to tone of voice and facial expression, so they can actually be quite compassionate as they engage with you and give you that information in real time. I think that will benefit a carer who is not wishing or wanting to wait hours before they can actually sit down with somebody to get an advice. We live in an incredibly immediate society. I remember roughly, 15 years ago, saying to somebody, whoever wants to book a holiday on a Sunday evening or contact their bank on a Saturday morning. Now, that's what we expect. We can't immediately satisfy a need. We feel disgruntled. And I think that applies to getting the information and support that, for example, family carers require. Or I can just imagine Keith sitting down, wanting an answer to a question, and just thinking, if only I could just log on to something and get that information, I'd feel better, rather than waiting to make an appointment. And let's face it, if you have a complaint that destroys your memory, hours after having thought, I need that answer to that question, you can't even remember what the question was you wanted an answer to. So I think technology can address that immediate need for information and advice.
Great, and I think that we've talked a lot about the people that are living with the condition and the carers immediately around them. And as our kind of final question of the main section, I'd just like to ask, apart from Googling, are there any other bits of technology that you think are helpful for research, the research stage at the moment, for those maybe outside of that, and also how that will help anything that helps others understand dementia a bit better? Maybe that's one for you to start with, June.
Well, how can technology help with research? One of the brilliant things about technology is the capacity we have to crunch enormous numbers, and the capacity that we have to communicate with each other over long distances. If you take, for example, this webinar that we're having just now, to actually find a space in the diary where Graham and I could talk to each other at this length would be quite a hard thing to do, but we're doing it through the miracle of technology. And to allow a whole lot of other people to be in the room to listen to maybe disagree or agree or say, well, that was interesting, I must find out what that website was, or that event, I'd like to go to that event, I'd like to know about that bit of research that Graham is doing with his with the workforce in Bupa, you know, to make them aware. All of these things are things which were unheard of in our time. I remember from the science fiction comics of my youth that, you know, this is the kind of thing, you know, talking to a panel on the wall was what people did in space stories, and here I'm doing it at my work. So in terms of research, the two fantastic things that technology gives us are the capacity to communicate over long distances in a human way. Of course, we could write and we could phone, but seeing each other's faces while we're talking is really important. And the second thing is the capacity to crunch very large numbers. And even though that's the case, it still doesn't replace the face-to-face contact. And that's why, so for example, at the conference that I mentioned, it's one of the things I don't want to miss before the end of the day. If anybody who's listening to this can't afford to come to this conference for money reasons, anybody who's listening to this, if you get in touch with me afterwards, I'll give you a free place at this event, because if you've sat through all this, then you deserve something in reward. So we would love you to be able to do that, because we think that some of the assistive technology that's visible there and some of the other things that are available there will be things that will help people both with research and with the practicalities of supporting people who live with dementia and their carers.
Thank you for that, Ian. That's really interesting and a great chance as well there as well. I mean, just before we conclude, Graham, was there anything you'd add to that and the research and the technology to help those understand dementia better?
Dan, I think we're at a time now, I won't say it's a crossroads, but we're at a time now where, as we've already touched on, we've got the language, we've got the awareness, we've got the motivation, we've got the ideas, and now we need the action. I mean, June leads the university in the UK that's at the cutting edge of design and technology when it comes to people who are affected by dementia. We need the investment to actually say, let's now test and learn. We've got to do it. And so we hear from York, all the wonderful work that they're doing. But we could do far, far more. I mean, just look at the urban landscape. How do you create an urban landscape that supports the wayfinding of people with dementia? Every major company in the UK is signed up to be dementia friends. So they would say they're a dementia-friendly supermarket. So what does that actually mean? What is tangibly different going into a dementia-friendly supermarket than one that hasn't signed up to that? And is a dementia-friendly supermarket going to stop moving around its products within a supermarket in order to get impulse buying? Because we know that people with dementia need consistency and predictability. They don't like change. So I think we've got to say, right, we have the intentions, we have the ideas, now we need to deliver. We need to test and learn to see what works and challenge those organisations and people who are just paying lip service, not actually delivering change. In India, they are at the moment looking at a 100 smart cities project. Now, the 100 smart cities, and it's not by no means confined to dementia, it's 100 smart cities to enable people to live well, including people with disabilities. And the smart cities are going to be smart because they're technologically enabled, but they're also smart because they think right. Their hearts and minds are in the right place. That's a commitment from a government that is in essence saying, we're going to have problems investing in health and care. We need to go outside of that to civil society. There's civil responsibility to support people who are living with disabilities, including dementia as well. In other words, that takes us right the way back to the beginning of this webinar. We do need a commitment by, for example, government, national, regional, local, to actually test and learn what we can do in terms of technology to support people who are living with dementia. So I think that's what I meant by a crossroads. At what point do we say we now deliver? Because we can't just be satisfied with just getting the words and language right.
Great, and that's really great, and that's all really interesting. We've covered quite a lot today, and that concludes our discussion overall. We've had quite a few questions in, as you can imagine, and unfortunately we're kind of running out of time, but we've got time for just one at the end, and I think I'll direct it to you first, June, if that's okay. And that is, what can colleagues do to make life easier in the workplace for those that are living with dementia?
Well, if I use the direct example of one of the awards that we saw, so colleagues in the workplace, first of all, know and understand as much about dementia as you possibly can, and understand that everyone with dementia is different, and so even though you know a lot about dementia, the way it's affecting them might be quite unique. The second thing is to make sure that if that person's confided in you about their dementia, and the same is true if it's someone who's a carer who's confided in you, make sure that they know about as many sources of support as exist, because I'm always astonished at the number of people who I meet, and after we've had a conversation, it turns out there's a lot of stuff that their doctor or their social worker or the people they've had contact with weren't able to tell them about. So do a bit of homework for them. They'll be tired and busy. Provide recommended reading for them of things that might help. So the thing to do is be helpful around that. In some cases, they just want you to be understanding about them being slow, but they don't want you to get involved. So I suppose in summary what I would say is everybody is so different. It's very hard to give a general answer to that question. But the more you know about dementia, the better you'll be able to help.
Great. And then Professor Stokes, just finally on your part, what do you see as the single kind of biggest challenge here at the moment from your view?
The single most greatest challenge to helping people with dementia in the workplace?
Indeed, yes.
I think it's what we touched on earlier, that there's still so much ignorance and stigma and prejudice around that needs to be challenged. And so I think before we do anything, we have to make sure that we truly do have dementia awareness and dementia-informed workplaces. I think if people are in that culture, then that's a major step forward. I agree with everything that June says. I think people need to be compassionate. So in everyday reality, that just means being kind. I think you respect somebody like Keith for who he is and for what he's living through, because I think even today, when I've worked in the field of dementia for so many years, I can't imagine what it must be like to actually progress through those stages of dementia when you're aware of what's happening. So I think to respect that person for who they are and what they're going through. And after you've done that, then just see no difference. I think you're there for them as a person. You don't put dementia to the forefront of your thinking. There's a person that's at the forefront of your thinking, a person who's just living with a disability, and don't start to think of them as being fundamentally different and they need to be wary of them. I think it's just involving people, integrating people to see that we're all alike.
Thank you very much. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you everyone for sending in your questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. However, we will be following up with both Professor Stokes and Professor Andrews with those questions and get back to you with the documentation following this event. Thank you again for spending the time with us today, and a special and very big thank you to both Professor Graham Stokes and Professor June Andrews. For anyone that would like any further information about dementia, please visit the bupa.co.uk website. And lastly, we'll be sure to be posting all the findings from the discussion and this video on the Bupa website as well. So please do share and help us raise awareness on how important it is to make the UK a dementia-friendly society. Thanks again and goodbye.